Thank you, Ray. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Steve Lee. Thank you, Mr. Lins, from Epic Medals, and Spike Wolf for making all the trip coming together. I'm really honored to be in this in Pittsburgh tonight and to have the opportunity to share my work with you. I'm also very happy that the prizes we're giving today, so you are all here. No, I'm just kidding, but I'm really happy to be here, and I will be speaking a little bit about my work. It will be a quick overview of what we do and why we do it, and I hope at the end we can open for questions and answers if you have some. I started my practice where I went out of architecture school, watching the world explode, literally, at this moment. And I also started practicing architecture when the world was looking at spectacular architecture. And that was the practice that everybody wanted to have. And I definitely was in this stream, and I was trying to look and build different buildings with uncharted geometries. But I was doing them very roughly, I would say. And my education was not an education with a lot of technology, so I know how to do architecture with my hands, not much with computers. So I'm not doing architecture with algorithms and into computer programs and then renderings and these things. So pretty much out of models, pretty much out of my hands. I always say we do architecture with scissors, paper and rock, which is true. And so I was starting to explore new geometries with these tools. It was a bit complicated. And some of the results are my early work. This is some images of the pavilion in Jinhua, as Raymond was mentioning. It was a selection of 17 young offices. We were one of the offices doing one building there. And I think what the result of this building, and it was more about this exploration of geometry, but I think the most interesting and important part of it, and what came out of it, it was a very close and good relationship with a good network of architecture office from all over the world. Artists as Weiwei, which is in the middle of the picture, and some other friends that we did along the way from all over the world that we have been collaborating. This is a big part of our office now. I think collaborating with different practices from different places, but not only architects, artists, and further away philosophers, urban thinkers, sociologists, is a way we do architecture. So I think this part that we started learning of networking within this project was the most important legacy that the project has. But I show it also starting the conversation, as I was telling you, about how we do architecture, how we started doing architecture and how we do it now. So from that stream of trying to find different geometries, we also did this a small studio, well, not so small, studio for an artist in Mexico City that she only wanted like a white, open, big, very lit up space. And that was our first work. We worked with poured concrete, exposed poured concrete. This is white exposed poured concrete. But again, still looking through challenging geometries, uncharted geometries with very rough methods, drawing them by hand and not working with strange algorithms. So it was kind of difficult. It was difficult to build them also. It was an incredible long process on how to try to pass this to get built in Mexico with little technology. But still was a challenge, was a nice thing. In this stream of work, we also designed this house, which is almost completed. It was designed then, that works also with the geometry of the site and of the hill. Very complex geometry coming out from the hill and the trees. I'm not going to stop about it, but it was developed around that area, that time, sorry. And I think everything changed with this house. This house was a very important project in our process. It was a house that we did with Gabriel Orozco. Gabriel Orozco is one of the most important contemporary artists we have in Mexico, or to say probably the most important one. The story, I'll go very quick. It was very funny how we met him. When I was starting my practice lots of years ago with other friends, we had no work, and one day we decided we wanted to design a house for Gabriel Orozco. We didn't know him, we just knew his work, as we were also designing houses in the moon, really, literally, because we thought probably at this time we were going to be designing houses in the moon, probably someday. And so we designed a house for him, and we knocked on his door, and we said, Gabriel, we designed a house for you. Of course, he laughed very much, but he opened the door, and he was also very excited about the process. We met him 2 or 3 times more to develop a little bit more the scheme. Of course, it was an utopic idea, nothing else happened. But nothing else happened from then. 5 years after, he arrived with a little model to my office, knocking on my door, asking me to help him with this building. So at the end, it was an incredible process, of course. Working 3 years closely with him was a great opportunity of many things. Many things that were happening at the same time in the office, working with this mind, a very obsessive mind, creative mind of his. For these 3 years was very, very good. But I think the most important thing, legacy that this process gave us, was the total understanding of our context. I think doing this house in this context, which is almost in the middle of nowhere. There's a little fishing village nearby it, and half an hour away is Puerto Escondido, which is a touristic place, very small and very a little bit left to. It's not big development, touristic development. So I think in this remote place, we of course encounter the most dramatic conditions of hand labor in Mexico. But this is where we work, no? We had to develop this scheme. Well, the scheme was a scheme for an observatory, existing observatory in India, and what we needed is to transform this observatory into a house. This is the process. We did it with Gabriel, and then we needed to transform this scheme, this house, into a built thing. This process was not a normal process, because in the beginning we did a normal process of putting plans together and building a great set of construction documents, and we arrived to site, we started building, and we surprisingly we get the shock of knowing the people who's going to build it that has no idea even how to read. Not to read a plan, not to read anything. So we had to translate all these construction documents into their language. And this process made us think on the way we did architecture before. Why we needed to explore in different geometries, why we need to do things more complex if we don't live in a context or in a country that really has the capabilities to building them. It's really very, of course, this has the most extreme conditions on hand labor, which on one side there is totally non-educated hand labor, but from the other side is very creative and very easy to do things and improvise and try things all over again. So it's the bad things and the good things that come with it that we learned that we had to take advantage of and design with this thing in our minds. So I think learning this through this process was difficult, of course, for putting this house together. Sometimes we had to, the workers had to run a little boat into a little river that forms 4 months of the year between the main road and the house. So it is a big challenge to bring all the materials into the place, a big challenge to build these kind of forms already there, and thinking it's a small, simple house with all this complexity made us think the way we really did architecture before. So I think this changed a lot the way we now do architecture. We really think global, we are acting global, but we are building our architecture from what we have in our local context, no? We think what's the labor we have, and we think the country where we live in, no? So I grew up, I started my practice when democracy was first happening in Mexico. So I started really looking at what my context was, no? I started looking that democracy was really young in my country when I started practice. So I started to forget what was happening in the world and focusing more on what was happening in my little world. To really try to act then globally, no? So I grew up in Mexico City. I worked there. My practice is there. Mexico City is this red dot in the center of, well, south center of the country. It's 22 million people. It's a very spread out city. You, of course, will feel it much more densely than Pittsburgh, 22 million people, but it's a city that in average has 2-floor heights, so it's not that high. This is a comparison between Mexico City and Pittsburgh metropolitan area. So in the red line, in the outer red line, you see is the city limits, where 9 million people live. In the extended city, 22 million people live. In the red area, it's 300,000 people, I think, a little bit more in Pittsburgh. Just so you can get a glimpse of what Mexico City is. So as I was saying, it's a very extensive city. It's not high dense. The reason is because we are in a very earthquake area, and the soil is very muddy. It was a lake. So the soil is very muddy, and we have earthquakes, big earthquakes, and it's very expensive to build high buildings. So it's only like 2 axes, Reforma and Insurgentes, 2 big avenues that have big buildings. The rest is very low. It's very green. The conditions of planning are very extreme. I would say planning is not a word that we know in the same definition that you all know. Planning for us is going after people arrive into the site, like this one, for example. It seems very well planned, but it actually is the most informal settlement in the city. It's Nesa, and this is one of the more extreme examples, but I wanted you to see it. It looks very well planned, but actually it was developed like this because agricultural land was sold illegally to people that were developing, that were settling their houses in these pieces of parcels that were divided like this because it was agriculture land. And then city planning arrived, and they started buying legally those part of land to create infrastructure for this part of the city. So this is how planning goes. The city, as I was telling you, is very, very, very extensive. It goes till the end in the valley. We're in the middle of a valley, and it really goes to the end of the valley where you are not able to build more, then it stops there. We have a very historic center. It was established in the 16th century by the Spaniards, who arrived and built up their city on top of the existing Aztec city. We have a very diverse type of architecture around the city. It's very mixed from different historic times, because of course not many times in history economy has been very steady. So buildings are from different epochs. Of course, we also have this new area of very big real estate development, like in the rest of the world. Of course, a part of a city that you could be anywhere in the world and still feel the same. We have various ways of approaching the developments in the hills where the city arrives to the limits. This is a very fancy area where people build in a huge structure just to have a flat garden. But of course we also have the other side of approaching the construction in the hills without the construction. We have in the city a huge problem of housing, which is being solved with this. I don't think it's the very greatest solution of all, but this is how they think they are solving the problem. And but in the end, I think that this huge city, it's a beautiful city, which it offers a lot of many different things that you can imagine with 9 million people. It has a very big, amazing central park, which is Chapultepec, facing one of the avenues that has these tall buildings, where our office is. I really thought that it was important to be in the center of the city where things happen. For me, it's very important that the office is facing this avenue that has a connection to this dynamic area in the city. This is where celebrations of when we win football are, demonstrations, well, if we win, because we normally not win. We have the best fan ever in this, fans in the world, but we don't win. But well, here in this street they celebrate, there's demonstrations, but mainly the everyday life, it's very lively. It is all the cultural expressions also happening within this street. The best museums are within the street, the embassies, the financial institutions, many of the housing projects, like very well-known social housing projects, are also within this street. Many things converge in this street. It's very representative, and we are there. I really chose this place for these specific reasons. And as I will be talking, I will be talking as we. And this is because we are a team. I probably am the representative, I'm here representing the team, and I'm the one that you see. But without all these people, this would not be possible. This is one of the things I think it's nowadays very important to architecture. It's that architecture, I think, it cannot be developed anymore by a single bright mind, because it's impossible for one person, I think, to be able to understand the whole complexity of the context and the problem that you need to solve with your architecture. So I think to respond in a correct way in this contemporary society, I think you need a very strong team of not only architects, but different disciplines. And I think also that a collaboration, a horizontal collaboration in this way brings much more things to a better result, and to really give more of a good building or site or thing to society that can really be an insert in this urban tissue or social tissue, giving something. So we team up. For the first thing, we have a very diverse group of people working in the office. I also like multiculturality a lot. In Mexico City is not as present everywhere as here, for example. But but I support it in the office. There's people from different parts of the world. There are 10 countries people from 10 different countries in the office. We're not that many, but there are 1 or 2 people from different countries, and they're mainly architects. But as I was telling, I like to team up with different people, like people doing ecology of landscape, politicians, financials, economists, sociologists. Depending on what project, this is the team we team up, and then we share work with. So as I was telling you, the work with Gabriel Orozco changed the way we did architecture radically. Probably not radically, because we were always using very simple, sincere materials. I call them sincere materials because we like to use natural materials that are really showing what they are. So with that we built since the beginning. But now what changed with the work of Gabriel is that we, as I was telling, we decided that it was not needed anymore to do all this complex research on geometries, and that with very simple geometries we could bring into really propositive and even complex contemporary architecture. So I think the first work we did after the work with Gabriel and after realizing this was this house in China. Was a house for a project that is named Ordos 100. Was a project that it was 100 architects were selected to do each a different house, a huge house, in a very strange context in the middle of the desert of the not in the middle of the desert, but in the outskirts of the desert of Gobi in China. And we were one of the 100 offices selected, and what we did, it was starting from a very archetypical form of a house that we all have in mind. We decided to divide it in 7 and each model to subtract one part so we could illuminate and ventilate within the volume, inside the volume, and not having any relationship with the exterior, because we knew that the context was going to be very strange and harsh. I heard Raymond saying today, architectural zoo. Probably, yes, we thought this was going to be an architectural zoo. It is. And so we decided to really keep our building focusing more into the interior of the volume, and this is why we took out all these parts and the way we could illuminate and ventilate. I'm not going to focus in these projects because I'm going to focus in some at the end, but I'm trying to give you a whole picture of how we develop this, how we work. This building is another example, and a great example on how we always think a little bit further in terms of how we can give a little bit more to the community, to their urban and social tissue. And again, in the terms of geometry, working with very simple forms, making, of course, a very complex building. The round form was given because it's a spectacle center, and the spectacle goes in a round scenario, like a Roman theater, and they needed this scenario for a very traditional show that is named a palenque, where normally the artists are singers that are in the middle and are messing up with the public, so it's interacting with the public a lot. So what we decided is we do these rings around the scenario that could hold the program that was needed for holding the spectacle, like of course press areas, storage room, changing rooms for the artists, shops, different areas for waiting for the spectacle, etc. But we also decided to create these rings around it to be accessible from the exterior, so this building could really be not only a spectacle center that probably could be used for 60 days a year, but a building that could be used every day of the year. Also, when it is used for the spectacle, it can be used for people that is not going to the spectacle, by creating these ramps that are making the building accessible from the exterior to become a little observatory point, but also these restaurants and bars that are serving the spectacle center can be open for the public and for the rest of the people throughout the year. So our idea was to bring this place more lively, used every day of the year, and of course the clients were very happy. This was not the client requirement, but our the final resolution was also trying to relate with the more local materials. So we use brick. Everybody in the area builds with brick their houses, gray concrete bricks. Actually they leave them like that. We used this brick, but it's ceramic brick, white ceramic brick, and the whole structure is done with this. The openings we're using these bricks as screens. So the whole building, the only part of glass is this. It's not very elegant place, doesn't need to have these fancy things, and it can be really open because the weather allows it. So we use this brick for everything. It's a definition material, but it also becomes as part of the structure. It is used steel that runs inside the bricks to hold up the whole structure together, but the bricks act as well as structure, as well as the aesthetical definition, and as well as the insulation needed, the respiration of the building. And I think this is also one of the most representative things we do. We choose the materials that can help us do everything in one building, no? The aesthetic definition, the insulation, the structure, and everything the same material. We fortunately don't have the regulations you have, but also not only we don't have them because we don't need them, we don't have these weather problems because the weather is very mild, probably all over Mexico. So it's very good we can use materials like that, no? So we make the advantage of that, not all over, but when we can, we do it. This is a community center we designed in Ciudad Juárez, which is a very dangerous city. I'm not going to go very deep in it, but here you can see the idea of the materials I was telling you. This project, it's about giving a little bit to the community. Again, it's a path we did along the river in Culiacán. I'm going to go more through Culiacán to this city later. The idea was to bring people to get a glimpse on the river and to think on the river and to see to the river, because the river is a little bit left away in the city, and it could become really the icon and the postcard for the city. And what we decided is to do this path that literally brings people on top of the city to make this happen. It was a monument that was going to be commemorative for the bicentenary anniversary of the revolution and independence in Mexico City. But at the end they didn't build it for that time, which I'm very glad. So they're going to build it in the next years, and it's going to be just a path, a nice path for the city to transform really the area around the river. In the same city, and another sense of how we approach commissions is this building. It's an existing building. When I arrived, they asked me to turn down the building and to build up a new building to hold the Institute of Culture from this state in the same city, Culiacán. I will go more through it. Right now you probably will be a little bit lost, but I don't want to focus on the project. I just want to tell you that what we convinced the people not turning down the building, especially because they're the Institute of Culture of the city, and to keep the building, to keep the architecture. It was not probably the best piece of architecture you ever seen, but it is part of the history of the city, it is part of the architecture of the city, and we thought it was important to keep it, to restore it to the original way it was thought and built up, and to add a new building, which is the white structure on top, to of course hold the new program they needed to add into the institution. And this way we could really recycle a site that it's important, that it's already a reference for this new city, relatively new city in Mexico, and that could also be helping the building to be together more nicely, and to be more as a building that could offer more to the urban situation. We did create this structure that creates roofs to the patios that are very used now, but it will be definitely more used if they have shadow and they have a better circulation of ventilation, etc. So we created a building that could give these to also public spaces. and that could connect these 3 buildings together because they were totally disconnected and this was a functioning problem. So we created this structure to do that. So this is also something that we try to encourage to create the best out of what we have and to give a little bit more to the community. This is what I was trying to explain with the Irapuato building. This is a university building, a building for a university in Culiacan again, that is almost completed. That it's a little bit the same. It's a link between the university and the exterior and the business. It's accelerator and incubator being there, and then it's 2 floors of landing. So what we decided is that the accelerator and incubator floor, we flipped it around 90 degrees, so it could be like the end grain that it's moving the whole building up. And what we achieved was with our scheme and convinced the clients, it was just not to close the building and put it into the university, which is what happens in Mexico, but to leave it open and to really make the connection with the city, that it could be an open public ground, and then the building could be the private part of the university. It is almost completed. It also comes from this simple geometry being complex, square floors. They wanted square, simple, flexible areas, office areas, but we created this type of movement in the geometry, so we could create terraces, we could create shadow for the interior. This is a very extreme hot weather place, so we created these shifts and movements with sun paths, so we could really give shadow spaces in the interior and just not to create only a square piled-up building that would be more difficult to control the heating and the light, etc. Now I'm going to focus a little bit more in 4 projects, and I will go quick through it because I think the whole idea is to see more overview, the general idea that I was explaining, how do we do architecture, but I will show a little bit more and focus 4 projects. The first one is a house we finished a year ago. That it's a house in near a lake. The lake is the red, more dense area you see within the limits of the Jalisco state. Mexico City is again the center. And this, the challenge of this project was that we had a budget of $150,000 US in total. So our first worry or preoccupation was that, how do we meet the budget, which is very, very low still for Mexico. In Mexico, of course, we can build much cheaper than here, but still very, very low budget for a 300 square meter house, which I think it's 900 square feet, 9,000? 3,000, yeah, that's, I never know. You should change the metric system, it's much easier. Or I might have to be more, more quick to react to the square feet now, but well. So what we, of course, knew in the beginning was that it was going to be a challenge to meet the budget. So our first thing was to do a big research on what material we could use that could let us do our architecture, how we do it, but also would be in budget, within budget. So we learned about rammed earth, compacted earth, we call it. I like to say more about compacted earth because this is how it's built. And the client was really, really keen and really into it, that we could do this research with her. Of course, it's one of the most used materials in the world, but we didn't know how to use it. So we learned how to use it, and through the process of learning how to use it, then we decided how to design with it. So we learned what was the module we could use, what was the largest span we could use, etc. And we decided to develop this scheme of 4 squares to align to the lake and two 45 degrees aligned to a tree that is very important in the site. And the two aligned to the lake, one is facing the lake, open to the lake, and it's the public space. The one facing to the mountains, it's the private space. And the two that are 45 degrees shifted are the service areas: kitchen, vestibules, terraces, bathrooms, etc. So I think that the process of building this house with compacted earth was amazingly productive, because it really, as I said, it was a very gentle material for us. It allowed us to do these incredible spans of open spaces, but also allowed us to be within budget. This material, of course, was the only material we could choose that could be everything: the structure, the aesthetical definition, the isolation we needed, etc. As I was saying, this is the way we like to do architecture. So at the end, I think the result, here you see we use these two columns to be the water drainage from the rooftop. Also there are little structure needed for the overhang of the roof. But the rest of the structure is all the compacted earth. We decided to take different types of earth from different places, so we could have this sense of scale. So we put the different layers until on top of the human scale, and the rest is the same earth. This was an aesthetical decision we made. And I think the process of working and discovering the material with the client was very interesting, and the way we were able to share this with her even made her design things like pieces of furniture for her house, a little bit the kitchen, a little bit the kitchen, the dining table. So involving the client is one of our also very important processes in the office, no? And I think that when the client is involved in this way, it really makes the process much more easier, as we can know. Well, if you can see it from other point, it is also very difficult, but it is much easier, the result, the good result, I think. In this house, we also invited two artists to do little interventions. You see some shadows in the windows of the bathrooms there. That's an artist, a young artist from Guadalajara, the region. And in the bathrooms, we also invited two young artists to develop the tiles. As I was saying in the beginning, we like to collaborate with different people. In this house was collaborating with the artists, which was collaborating also with landscape artists and ecology of landscape specialists, which is a team named TOA that was Raymond mentioning before. And but especially I think the collaboration here in this house was with the client, was with the builder, because he was the one teaching us to use this material, and I think that the result of this collaboration was a happy client. The next project I wanted to show is a very special program. We also been very lucky to be designing these very varied programs. I always say we're designing everything from a botanical garden to a funeral house, from life to death, and a lot of things that happen in between, which is true. We're doing a kindergarten, we're doing a school, building for a university, houses, offices. I think the only thing we haven't designed yet is a hospital, but we've been fortunately enough to design cultural institutions, to intervene in cultural spaces, and it is a big challenge to understand a different program every time, especially for a very young office like ours. But that has also made us more clear that we truly have to collaborate with different specialists, that we cannot learn one day how to define a botanical collection for a botanical garden and the next day how to balsam a body into a coffin. It's impossible to know all these things, so we need to really team up with these specialists that are working with this every day, so we could really get their input in the project from them, no? So this funeral house, it's in the northern state of San Luis Potosí. That's the state mark you see, and the city is the red dot north of Mexico City. And what we did is we developed a scheme that was able to connect with the garden. In Mexico, the funerals are at the end very social event. So we decided that for one side is a very important event in people's lives, is a very special moment, very shocking moment, but also it becomes a very social event where probably you go and meet a lot of people you haven't met in several years, so you spend lots of time exchanging your life with them, friends, families, etc. People probably you don't want to meet, etc. You meet there. So it's a very special moment in the lives of people. So we decided it was important to make a place where all these feelings could be exalted. I think in Mexico, funeral houses are really, truly horrible places, tenebrous places. I think that you probably go out worse than what you go in with the shocking news you were probably in there. Why or because? And so I decided that it was important we do a place where you can really leave your feelings there. That they're so exalted in this place that they can be left there, and you can go a little bit out, a little bit more relaxed if you can. No? So we decided one way was to let the garden in. Another way was to decide to make these chapels very private, but at the same time very capable to have a social gathering. And so what we did is we splitted the private with the public parts of the program. I think public is the offices, the cafeteria, the flower shop, etc., and private the chapels where the funerals are done. And we decided to merge them and to split them within the garden. And at the end, what we had is these 5 chapels that are divided in itself. They're divided. There's one area in the chapel that is dedicated to moor the body, where the body is present, and then there's one area that is more of a social area. So people would have a more private area to have these social encounters. In Mexico, normally what would happen is in the chapel they would just be a few seconds, and everybody would be in the halls talking and really being in the halls because they don't want to talk with the body there. So what we did is we developed private space, which is not normal in Mexico for a funeral house, to have these in a more private space and not with interfering with other funerals. Each chapel has a little garden, private garden, and it's all connected in an open hall, shadow open hall. All the services where the bodies are prepared and to be displayed, if you can say display, into the chapels are in the basement. And the chapels are interacting more with the garden on the ground floor. We developed this project in a very local way, more or less like Gabriel Orozco's house. The client decided to hire people from the local community, so no big builders company was hired. And so we had to develop really all these details and plans with the people there in the construction site. So we knew, since we designed it, that it was going to be very rough. The construction was going to be very not perfectly detailed, and this was not what we wanted. We really wanted to achieve this sensorial space dealing with the dramatic entrance of light, and the dramatic changes of light and darkness, and the dramatic changes of feeling to being inside and outside. So we could really make your feelings exalted, no? So we developed this building in concrete. Again, the concrete is done with this aggregate from the region. The aggregate from the region is this color, so this is why the building is this color. And we wanted to have, again, local material that could, well, concrete is more a universal material, but with this aggregate that could give a sense to the relations of the grounds of the building. So these images that you've been seeing is the whole experiencing the most dramatic time of the day, where the light is entering with more direct light. The hall that connects the 5 chapels. These are the doors to the entrances to the chapels. This is the view to the cafeteria and the offices. And entering the chapels, this is the, you enter to the more public space within the private space, a more relaxed area, living room, and then you walk during this hallway down to the chapels. You arrive through the hallway to where the mooring place takes place. Also working with skylights and the very dramatic entrance of light, and the idea of trying to really exalt your feelings when you enter this place, and so you can really let them all out there. Each chapel has a little room. These are underneath for people to rest and to probably bathe themselves, etc. Because funerals in Mexico last from something between from 24 hours to 48. So people can really change or rest a little bit in these areas. Cafeteria, one of the most public spaces. The little private gardens around the chapels. Different gardens are working with different types of plants or no plants at all in these private gardens of the chapels. As I was saying here, you can look at the more living room area of the chapel, and this is more the mooring area. And as I was telling you, the idea of this whole building was not about working in the specific details, because as you can see, there are a lot of details that are not perfectly done, and this is something we knew. This is how we design with, and we were not intending on doing a perfect, beautiful final definition of the detail. No, this is something also very important of our understanding of architecture. Probably, I think, much more in Europe, but also here, everything is about the last detail. In Mexico, not only we don't have the time to develop the final details, because always the clients want architecture to be built like the next day they decided they wanted to build something, literally, so you're always late. And but also I think we don't have the money to develop the details as we would love to. I would of course love to be able to design within a budget that I would be able to develop in every detail in the building. But we also don't have the handcraft that can make these possible. But we have the creative handcraft to develop a very simple frame, for example, to develop these walls. So on the other hand, I think this is what I was explaining through the beginning, that we like to take advantage of these conditions. We like to take advantage of the idea we don't have a very specific and well-educated hand labor, but we have a very creative one. So we developed this idea of making these molds with these people and using the aggregate. It took us, I think, 6 months in the construction site to get the correct blend for the concrete with the aggregate of the place. It took us also a lot of time to develop the frame for the framework of the poured exposed concrete. But I think at the end, the result, it looks in the quality of space. It doesn't matter about the details, because this is how we treated it since the beginning, no? And this is how we decided we wanted to design with. The next project I will show, it is a botanical garden that Ray was mentioning. This botanical garden was an existing botanical garden in Culiacan, again the city where we did the river walk and the university building. And this city is in the north of the country. It's the capital of a state named Sinaloa. It's a regular city in Mexico, I would say. It's a 2-floor height, 1 million people city, which is more or less the cities around Mexico. For me, it has nothing to exalt except the river, and the river is not used to be the representative thing of the city, but for me is that. And it's a city that is very religious. 95% of the population is Catholic, but very Catholic, so there's a lot of churches all over the city. There's people practicing Catholicism a lot. It's a city that they don't really believe in keeping history or keeping culture or architecture, so they just leave it to, so it ruins away, it falls apart, and they are continuously trying to build new things and turning down the old things. This is why I thought it was important to keep the Cultural Institute. And it's a city that lives from agriculture. Unfortunately, and probably you have heard of it, it lives from the good agriculture, but also from the bad agriculture. It is the capital of the drugs, or it was probably the first city known in the country for being the capital of the lords, of the drug dealers. And it developed because it is a big and very important state for agriculture. And of course, it was very easy to jump into the bad agriculture. Actually, they were the very sole providers of opium during the 30s to the US. So this is how it evolved to become the city of the lords. So there's also a very important industry around it, very rich people in the city that are very interested in changing this image, and one of them is the president of the board of patrons of this botanical garden. It's a public botanical garden in the city that it's really trying to make a shift in the idea on how people see their own city, but also how people from the exterior see their city. And this project is the one that is going to be shown in this in the Haynes Architecture Center next September. I think it's a very important project for us, for the office, definitely. We've been working for it for 7 years. But not only that, I think for Mexico it's a very important project because it really is a very exemplary work of a businessman working with the government. In Mexico, these things don't happen. Here, you have all these business people interested in cities and in their own places, and they found universities, they found cultural institutions, they found parks. But in Mexico, this doesn't happen. In Mexico, people is waiting and expecting that the government is founding everything. So it's a very important example in Mexico from a businessman interested in his city, founding this garden and making this initiative of these things. So as I was saying, it was an existing botanical garden, and what we were called to, it was to design some buildings that could make all the program come together, make the new program come together and the existing program come together. What's the new program? The businessman decided that they wanted to put part of his art collection in the garden. So apart from the botanical experience, you could have this aesthetical experience within the garden. So a curator was invited, and the curator invited us to build some buildings that could really make this blend, an exhibition room, a library, a workshop for different things, mainly pottery, but different rooms and areas, of course, of services, offices, buildings, a greenhouse, etc., that could make the program, existing program and the new program blend, but also to bring this botanical garden into a very incredible level, both nationally and internationally. So what we decided, the first thing is we needed to do a master plan to integrate all these things, which was a very difficult task. They didn't ask us for that, but we thought it was very important to develop a kind of grid. First we were thinking in different grids on how to organize this garden and how to put it together. And we developed these several grids, and nothing worked until we thought, why would we want to impose a grid, different geometry to a garden? So what we did is we took the branches of a tree of the garden, we traced them and we overlapped them with what existed, and from that we developed the master plan. Of course we had to adapt it to what existed, so it changed a little bit, but this somehow was also very beautiful for me, because it was coming from a tree that in a way, if you take a piece or you move a branch of a tree, the tree keeps growing and it never dies in that way. So it can grow better. So what we did it was just fixing and moving these branches that we traced in the beginning to adapt to what existed and to what was needed. And at the end, this is not the latest master plan, but was the one it was brought in the beginning, because as I was saying, we were been working for these for almost 7 years. So of course the project has evolved through these years, but I think we have made an incredible team with this curator who was in the beginning with us. After we developed the master plan, we decided it was very important to work with a specialist in botanics, because as we thought it was mostly important to keep the botanic in the highest level possible. And that was firstly a botanical garden, and then the art was introduced. So our idea of bringing the botanics to the highest level was to bring a team with it. That was TOA, Taller de Operaciones Ambientales. And what they're doing is we're working together to make this ecology of landscape plan, and intervening not only in designing different parts of the landscape, but also to rebuilding different parts of the collection. This is the bamboo collection, and we not only with them designed together the water pond and everything and how it's discovered everything, but they also developed the collection. They are trying to put the collection into a very important international level, especially on bamboos and on palms, because this is the part of the collection that the Botanical Garden had more developed when we arrived. And of course we've been working through different ideas on how to meandering around the garden in different type of paths, different ways of putting water around, different ways of discovering the collection. I think one of the most important things that we wanted to keep from when we arrived to the garden was the way it was very, very intuitively done. The garden had a very important collection of plants. Now it's growing even more, but it always was very simply displayed. It made you feel very welcome. It made you feel very willing to learn and not ashamed that you don't know. I think that when a place is very well classified, perfectly done, perfectly put, sometimes you could feel that you don't fit in because you don't know about it, and you would feel bad to get in. This happens a lot in Mexico with art, especially in this place. So we thought it was very important to keep this sense of discovering this place much more in a playful way than in a perfectly classified thing. that it still is, no? It's not shown like this, but TOA has been done an incredible work of classifying everything scientifically, working with it. So it has this background, but really the idea of how the sense how you work through it, you go through it is more intuitively, and that you learn through more the experience than the specific scientific experience, no? So as I was telling you, we developed different types of going into things, and I think one of the most important achievements is the way art is introduced here. Art in this city is not part of the common everyday life of people. They don't really deal with art in any senses, probably more with folk art, this yes, but that's it. And if art, contemporary art, was introduced into a museum in this city, nobody would go. So I think that actually there is a museum, and the same guy is trying to found this museum and make interesting exhibitions, etc. Very few people go to see it because people feel not well to go because they think they don't understand art. So the great idea was to display contemporary art in this context, because people is starting to relate with it in a very different way, in ways that, of course, it wouldn't happen in a museum. And this is, I think, the most important part of, and the most important thing that the park is giving, this garden is giving to the society, is this intimate, important, good relationship with plants and with art, that it wouldn't happen if this place was scientifically perfectly displayed, or that if this art was inside the museum, no? So I think that this way, community is really being introduced into these two topics, which is not everyday life, is not part of the everyday life, in a very important way, no? This is a piece from Alora and Calzadilla. They are very important American artists. They were the one representing the USA in the last Venice Biennale. And this piece, very simple piece, is one of the most, of course, popular pieces now in the garden. This is a piece from Dan Graham, also American artist, working with reflection and perception within these pavilions. This pavilion that is built there, of course, it's beautiful to watch, it's very difficult to photograph, but again, people are really interacting with it in a very different way, no? They're making this place their very important place in society. It's a place where they take the photographs for their wedding or for their 15 years, which in Mexico is very important. When girls turn 15 years, they do a big celebration, so they go here to take pictures. And of course, the art is very varied and very different. This is a piece from Francis Alice, which is a Belgian-born Mexican artist, I would say. He's living in Mexico since a long time. Of course, imagine people thinking what this strong guy is doing with a car inside of our garden. Literally, this is something I heard when I was passing by. This piece was just installed, no? So I think that this connection with contemporary art, that this is the only type of art, I think that it is allowed to be displayed like this, in a garden like this, fortunately, is really making an important impact in the society, no? This is a pavilion by Olafur Eliasson, that it's just playing with geometry and the shadows and how the trees and the plants grow along it, and it works differently in the different times of the year. This is another piece from an American artist, again, Richard Long, that this was the only artist that was not, this was the only piece that it was not commissioned specifically for the site. The rest of the pieces, all the artists went to the place and proposed an idea and developed the idea together with the curator to build up their own pieces around the garden. We also were intervening on mastering how they could relate each other into the garden and with the garden, and how they could be discovered within the master plan with all the artists. So it was also a very important process from the office. And the only work that was probably a very important work the curator wanted to acquire, that it was not done specifically for the site, was this one. But of course, again, the same idea of this piece, which is about geometry. Richard Long dealing with a very nature, rough, not geometric form of stone, making a very specific geometry of an ellipse, becomes an everyday thing for picnics, for photo shootings, and for many, many different things, no? And people relating to art, as I was saying, in an everyday basis, very differently as if this piece was, again, in a museum. This is a piece from Teresa Margolles, an artist from Mexico, from exactly this area of the country. She deals a lot with drug dealers, and the idea of this piece is that it represents a very nice, common resting area, but the benches are poured in with the water that was washed from the bodies of the dead people from the drug dealers. So people is resting on top of this problem, literally. At the beginning, of course, society was rejecting this piece, but at the end now they're really sitting there and resting on top of the problem. Different pieces from Valesca Suarez, a Brazilian artist, Marco Ramirez R. This is one of the girls turning 15, taking her pictures there, making again the art part of her life, a very important part of her life. Julian Oppi, Gabriel Orozco, the list is 35 artists. They're all very impressive, and all the works deal with the place. They're very different pieces. For example, one that cannot be photographed is the Tino Seagal piece. He's an artist that deals with memory, so his piece cannot be documented. And what he did is he put some singers that they sang to you when you approach them, whatever they come to their minds. And it's very beautiful. You walk through these paths in the garden, and somebody's singing to you. And when you pass and you are gone, the singer stops. So if you go back again, then she sings again to you. So the pieces are very varied. They deal with different topics, but definitely they are all dealing with this public open space, free public open space. Our architecture, this is another piece from Sofia Tawas. And our architecture, the idea was again to be dialoguing with nature. We decided it comes from the master plan you saw, the geometries come from the master plan you saw. It of course adapts to the existing vegetation and the program. So the first was, this is a building that is going to be built probably in 2 years. It's a south access with a cafeteria and service area. This is the first building you encounter through south access, which is an open small auditorium for different things, but the main important thing is a film that will show an introduction of what it is in the garden for 7 minutes. I think what we wanted is to develop again this building that could be very roughly done in a very simple material. This is exposed concrete, that again the concrete works with everything as a structure, as insulation, aesthetical definition, etc. What I've been saying. This is a part of the cultural complex, which is an exhibition room, pottery shop, and a library. This is the north view of the library and the exhibition and the pottery shop. This is going to be built probably at the same time as the south access that I showed you in the beginning. This is a night view of it, and again art is also dealing with the buildings, not only with the plants. I will show you a more specific example in this cultural, the other was a cultural complex, this is the educational complex that has a little service area, an auditorium, and an educational room for kids. And these bumps you see in the front of the building are a piece of art by Tercero Un Quinto, which they developed a piece out of the ruins of the existing little hut that was there, and they did this called New Ruins, and it's actually like a playground for kids, made out of this building that existed there. So this the idea of our architecture was to create a building for every program, have a different building. So every time you need to change program, for us to say it, you have to go out to the exterior. This was important for me, not to create one big building, but to create this series of buildings where you have to experience the weather, the temperature outside, the plants, the smell, the noises of the garden, to go again to another building or even to the toilet. From the auditorium to go to the toilet, you need to go outside, you need to experience it, everything, the weather, all these things. And for me it was important that this happened because it always reminds you that you are in this botanical garden, although you are in these probably urban buildings like an auditorium or an educational facility. No, this is the work I was telling you about of Tercero Quinto. And I think that, as I was telling you, with art, we wanted to create this architecture that could be in the way of this everyday life of people. This is the interior of the educational facility, and well, a little bit about the structure of the buildings. They're concrete shells that have 30 centimeters of thickness all together. The walls, the slab and top and down, they're 30 centimeters, and that's what it holds everything together. It doesn't have any structure in the middle. The only structure here is to hold the middle floor that serves for the teachers, but the rest is one shell, and this is how all the buildings are developed. This are the toilets. This is a hall for the auditorium, a small auditorium that is used for different types of lectures and different types of things. And as I was saying you, I think that at the end also people are relating to architecture in a very different way, in a way that probably they wouldn't relate in any way if this was not said in this kind of context. No? I think with this I would finish my presentation. I know I said I wanted to present another project, but if I do, we're going to be very, very late, and I prefer to open this to discussion. Thank you very much. I will give you with a film of the fourth project I never show, which is a pilgrimage route. We did along a pilgrim's route in Jalisco. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments?
Wonderful work, wonderful presentation. I think you gave some sort of amazing arguments for how to make something place-specific, and sort of adapt to the context. You talked about the importance of the context. How does one start? How do you start to think about the difference between the sort of specific place, the site in which you're building, and the larger one of the state, for example, or of the country? You gave these maps of your country. So what is sort of Mexican? What is the state specific? And how do you start to think about that, the larger context, I guess, rather than a specific site?
Well, I think this is the vision we have, as I was saying, more global, no? And this, I think, it's more easy for me because I have it since I was studying. It's more difficult to get the local knowledge because I was not I didn't grow up there, so to get this specific local knowledge, we always or hire people from the place to be in our practice to work through that project. And if it's not possible, we at least have a consultant that it's really from these local areas that could help us. For example, the Rammed Earth house, the first move we did before even drawing one line was hiring the one who did build the house, the builder, that is from the local community that knows about this specific material and how to build it. And this is the first person we met ever, and with him, then we learned the process of making this, using this material, and then we started designing. Or for example, in the botanical garden, we knew that the most important thing was to reinforce the botanical collection and how to relate with the botanical thing. So the first thing is we convinced the client, after presenting him the whole master plan, because we were very young office at the time, so first we had to convince him we were the ones who were going to design the thing. So we first presented the master plan, and with that we proposed the idea of hiring taller de operaciones ambientales, who are the people who do the ecology of landscape, and the experts on botanics, have experts on botanics, so we could really understood how we could work with this idea of making this botanical garden very specific, very good in terms of botanics, but also to create this sense of much more of a simple everyday garden, no? So we knew this was going to be very important, so this is why we hired these people. So as I was telling you, I think we have more the vision of the global thing on how we want to do aesthetically probably definition of our architecture in a more global way, but the more local thing specific is the one that we really need support, and this is why we team up with different people. No?
Is there something between the global and the local, which is the Mexican? Is your architecture Mexican?
Yes, I think so, definitely. I think it's Mexican. I think it's more than Mexican, it's local.
Okay, well that's interesting.
Yeah.
Distinction.
I thought it was interesting, given the local specificity of the projects, that your team is so international and diverse. Could you talk about the way in which that diversity of your actual firm interacts with its local elements?
Yeah, I think it's been very helpful. For example, we're working in a school for the French government in Mexico. So we have two French people that are understanding perfectly what the French bureaucratic people are asking, and we know the local context. So it's a very good combination of really understanding the culture of these people that want to build this school there. And on the other hand, we, for example, have two German guys that were very key persons that allow us to win a competition in Switzerland that we team up with the Swiss guys. And but I think also on the contrary, like the input that they're putting in the office in the local projects is very important. Having this very technical trained mind and specific details and working in this context that it is not technical at all brings a lot of very nice things together, because then we can develop in a technical way more things like, for example, the funeraria, that we were able to develop these, the use of this aggregate for this project. It's developing with them, with these German people that know these things from their minds, no? And we probably don't do it, and we develop them with the people that really know how to do it inside. No? So this is the kind of both ways of coming and going that happens with this international team. We also were having Chinese people when we were doing this project in China, so it was very easy to understand many things. No, for example, that this guy started working in the office like when we were half the way of schematic drawings for the pavilion in China, and we realized when he entered the office that they don't speak English, and we were struggling doing all these plans in English, because although there's people from different places of the world, at that time there was nobody that had studied in an English-speaking country. So it's difficult to turn into technical drawings into a language you are not used to go so technical. So we were struggling with it, and the Chinese guy got in and we said, they don't speak English either. Why would we try to do this because they're going to have the same problematic when they try to build this thing. So we develop more graphic design, and this guy helps us a lot to understand how they would read drawings. So we send drawings out with almost no notes, just drawings, no? And at the end it was amazingly how they really understood our project. We arrived being there twice, I think, and our project was exactly how we thought of it. Yeah, very quick. I'm sorry I didn't, I was not able to go through the whole project, but it's a pilgrimage route that it's been there for 200 years, and we were hired to do a master plan and to put in some structures that could help in terms of infrastructure, for example, shelters and service areas, because there was nothing, just very improvised bathrooms or toilets or improvised places to sleep or to eat. But also we were asked to do some worship places or some points of interest along the route. And I convinced the client to invite Derek Delecamp, which is another Mexican young architect, and together we did this master plan, and together we convinced the client to invite different people to do each different interesting point or iconic encounter point. So we invited people that we met in Jinhua, or the artist Weiwei that we also met there, the Swiss teams that we meet there, we also invited them, but we also invite people like Alejandro Aravena from Chile that also understand a little bit more the context and the religion situation. It's a Catholic pilgrimage route. And this white structure you were asking, this is an open chapel that we designed with Derek Delecamp and our office, and it's just the scheme comes from the cross, which is the most important symbol of Catholicism, and we lift up the endpoints of the cross to create this open chapel, and also to become a distinctive point marking the beginning of this route. This is where most of the pilgrims meet to start this 4 days walk. And along the route you encounter different structures. This is the one from Weiwei, and this is two walls, like they go out to the exterior and they go into the ground that you just encounter along the route. So there are some points that are distinctive points, but also some points that are more points that you encounter along the route. This is one. There's another circle that we will see a little bit later that encircles just the landscape, that this was done by Derek Delecamp. There's an office named HHF who did a round thing as well, that it's an observatory. And Christian Gantenbein, that they did a column that it stands out as a point, important point to also meet people and meet the rest of the people. Very quick, I explained it, but I can show some images very quick while we go through other questions. Yeah.
I thought it was very convincing and successful, your attention to detail of materials and getting to know the materials well, and the way you can tweak them. You said 6 months for the find the right color aggregate for the funeral mourning complex.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering how your firm operates, how the office operates to get to know those materials. Is it in your office? Is it lots of architects coming to the site to play around? Is it?
This specifically was on the site, playing around in the site with the client and with the people that the client hired for it. So we were going to the site to experiment with it. So a lot of travel is involved in our office. Normally we have to go to the site because also from the rammed earth, what we needed it was to understand the local builder, this person. So we needed to be there, and also the client lives around there. So when we're in Mexico City, so we had to travel and develop their on-site no? For example, for the botanical garden, we developed different models and mock-ups in the office, but normally it's in the site. Here you can see the open chapel and the next point of the route that is on the top, that it's a column done by Kristen Gantenbeck, a Swiss office that also has an interior space. And then you encounter this one along the route and like this. Yeah.
Do you think there's a connection between how users understand and relate to your works and how you do architecture? So for instance, you were talking about using a graphic method to explain construction drawings on a much more intuitive level. Do you think that helps locals understand your work more, I guess?
Well, indirectly, yes. I think it helps builders understand it more. But of course, the builders are part of the community, and if they understand it, probably the people will understand it. No, it's a different thing to understand how to build in that you feel good in and how to go or leave the place. No, I think. But indirectly, I think it does, because if you try to relate to the local context, then you relate to what they're used to relate with. So in a sense, I guess that, yeah, indirectly, this understanding specifically makes this relationship.
Or I guess, do you think more like analog architecture is understood better than something that's more digital and figured out with algorithms? Do you think people can understand the geometries that you use more so than...
In my context, yes. Probably in other contexts, no. But in my context, definitely yes, because people doesn't even understand what an algorithm is. So in my context, yes. In different contexts that we encounter, we probably can use more of these technologies. And we, for sure, if this is the way we need to work, we learn it and we worked with it.
Where's this path?
This is in Jalisco. It's very nearby the Rammed Earth House. It's in the hills of this state. It goes along a place named Ameca, and it runs like 154 kilometers to a place named Talpa, which is where is a Virgin of Rosary that is the one that is worshipped. Yeah.
It's obviously your presentation that you've been a very successful working in Mexico as a woman, but being a woman from Mexico, I'd ask you, how difficult has it been for you to be accepted within the architectural community and also within the economy and the general, I would say, machismo that I think still exists in the country?
It's funny that I get this question many times, of course. And for me, in the beginning of how I started, it was never a question. I was never thinking that I was different in any way, because I was educated probably like this, and I never saw any constraints about it, and I never realized it. They were. Of course, when I started getting these questions, I didn't like to answer them, because I thought, we're the same. Why would I have to answer these? Because we're the same people. But I understand, of course, this question, because, of course, there's not many women in the field. But I think that the only limits and constraints are in our minds. And because I'm really like the living proof, I haven't encountered one single different problem of what those of my same generation male architects have encountered. So in my society and where I live now in Mexico City and where I work, I haven't encountered any constraints about being a woman. So I actually think that the only constraints are the one women are thinking there are. I think that the limits the women are putting in their heads is nowadays, of course in the past was different, and of course probably in some different societies still are, but nowadays in my society where I live, it's even an advantage, because nowadays people are thinking in more inequality. There's not many women officers, so they're thinking in a invited competition. I think no, we have to invite a women, so I'm always in. While the male have to really share all the things, I'm always in because they think we need to invite women. So Tatiana, they call me to competitions that are from generations ahead of me, or even younger, and I'm there because they need a woman. So at the end, I have more advantages. I think I don't think of it like this, but it is true. Thank you very much. How to read, not to read a plan, not to read anything. So we had to translate all these construction documents into their language. And this process made us think on the way we did architecture before. Why we needed to explore in different geometries, why we need to do things more complex if we don't live in a context or in a country that really has the capabilities to building them. It's really very, of course, this has the most extreme conditions on hand labor, which on one side there is totally non-educated hand labor, but from the other side is very creative and very easy to do things and improvise and try things all over again. So it's the bad things and the good things that come with it that we learned that we had to take advantage of and design with this thing in our minds. So I think learning this through this process was difficult, of course, for putting this house together. Sometimes we had to, the workers had to run a little boat into a little river that forms 4 months of the year between the main road and the house. So it is a big challenge to bring all the materials into the place, a big challenge to build these kind of forms already there, and thinking it's a small, simple house with all this complexity made us think the way we really did architecture before. So I think this changed a lot the way we now do architecture. We really think global, we are acting global, but we are building our architecture from what we have in our local context. No? We think what's the labor we have, and we think the country where we live in. No? So I grew up, I started my practice when democracy was first happening in Mexico. So I started really looking at what my context was. No? I started looking that democracy was really young in my country when I started practice. So I started to forget what was happening in the world and focusing more on what was happening in my little world. To really try to act then globally. No? So I grew up in Mexico City. I worked there. My practice is there. Mexico City is this red dot in the center of, well, south center of the country. It's 22 million people. It's a very spread out city. You, of course, will feel it much more densely than Pittsburgh, 22 million people, but it's a city that in average has 2-floor heights, so it's not that high. This is a comparison between Mexico City and Pittsburgh metropolitan area. So in the red line, in the outer red line you see is the city limits, where 9 million people live. In the extended city, 22 million people live. In the red area, it's 300,000 people, I think, a little bit more in Pittsburgh. Just so you can get a glimpse of what Mexico City is. So as I was saying, it's a very extensive city. It's not high dense. The reason is because we are in a very earthquake area, and the soil is very muddy. It was a lake. So the soil is very muddy, and we have earthquakes, big earthquakes, and it's very expensive to build high buildings. So it's only like 2 axes, Reforma and Insurgentes, 2 big avenues that have big buildings. The rest is very low. It's very green. The conditions of planning are very extreme. I would say planning is not a word that we know in the same definition that you all know. Planning for us is going after people arrive into the site. Like this one, for example, it seems very well planned, but it actually is the most informal settlement in the city. It's Nesa. And this is one of the more extreme examples, but I wanted you to see it. It looks very well planned, but actually it was developed like this because agricultural land was sold illegally to people that were developing, that were settling their houses in these pieces of parcels that were divided like this because it was agriculture land. And then city planning arrived and they started buying legally those part of land to create infrastructure for this part of the city. So this is how planning goes. The city, as I was telling you, is very, very, very extensive. It goes till the end in the valley. We're in the middle of a valley, and it really goes to the end of the valley where you are not able to build more, then it stops there. We have a very historic center. It was established in the 16th century by the Spaniards who arrived and built up their city on top of the existing Aztec city. We have a very diverse type house for Gabriel Orozco. We didn't know him, we just knew his work. As we were also designing houses in the moon, really, literally, because we thought probably at this time we were going to be designing houses in the moon, probably someday. And so we designed a house for him, and we knocked on his door, and we said, Gabriel, we designed a house for you. Of course, he laughed very much, but he opened the door, and he was also very excited about the process. We met him 2 or 3 times more to develop a little bit more the scheme. Of course, it was an utopic idea, nothing else happened. But nothing else happened from then. 5 years after, he arrived with a little model to my office, knocking on my door, asking me to help him with this building. So at the end, it was an incredible process, of course. Working 3 years closely with him was a great opportunity of many things. Many things were happening at the same time in the office, working with this mind, a very obsessive mind, creative mind of his for these 3 years was very, very good. But I think the most important thing, legacy that this process gave us was the total understanding of our context. I think looking or doing this house in this context, which is almost in the middle of nowhere. There's a little fishing village nearby it, and half an hour away is Puerto Escondido, which is a touristic place, very small and very a little bit left to. It's not big development, touristic development. So I think in this remote place, we of course encounter the most dramatic conditions of hand labor in Mexico. But this is where we work now. We had to develop this scheme. Well, the scheme was a scheme for an observatory, existing observatory in India, and. What we needed is to transform this observatory into a house. This is the process. We did it with Gabriel, and then we needed to transform this this scheme, this house, into a built thing. This process was not a normal process because in the beginning we did a normal process of putting plans together and building a great set of construction documents, and we arrived to site, we started building, and we surprisingly we get the shock of knowing the people who's going to build it that has no idea even. Thank you, Ray. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Steve Lee. Thank you, Mr. Lins from Epic Medals, and Spike Wolf for making all the trip coming together. I'm really honored to be in this in Pittsburgh tonight and to have the opportunity to share my work with you. I'm also very happy that the prizes were given today, so you are all here. No, I'm just kidding, but I'm really happy to be here, and I will be speaking a little bit about my work. It will be a quick overview of what we do and why we do it, and I hope at the end we can open for questions and answers if you have some. I started my practice where I went out of architecture school, watching the world explode, literally, at this moment. And I also started practicing architecture when the world was looking at spectacular architecture. And that was the practice that everybody wanted to have. And I definitely was in this stream, and I was trying to look and build different buildings with uncharted geometries, but I was doing them very roughly, I would say. And my education was not an education with a lot of technology, so I know how to do architecture with my hands, not much with computers. So I'm not doing architecture with algorithms and into computer programs and then renderings and these things. So pretty much out of models, pretty much out of my hands. I always say we do architecture with scissors, paper and rock, which is true. And so I was starting to explore new geometries with these tools. It was a bit complicated. And some of the results are my early work. This is some images of the pavilion in Jinhua, as Raymond was mentioning. It was a selection of 17 young offices. We were one of the offices doing one building there. And I think what the result of this building, and it was more about this exploration of geometry, but I think the most interesting and important part of it, and what came out of it, it was a very close and good relationship with a good network of architecture office from all over the world. Artists as Weiwei, which is in the middle of the picture, and some other friends that we did along the way from all over the world that we have been collaborating. This is a big part of our office now. I think collaborating with different practices from different places, but not only architects, artists, and further away philosophers, urban thinkers, sociologists, is a way we do architecture. So I think this part that we started learning of networking within this project was the most important legacy that the project has. But I show it also starting the conversation, as I was telling you, about how we do architecture, how we started doing architecture and how we do it now. So from that stream of trying to find different geometries, we also did this small studio, well, not so small, studio for an artist in Mexico City that she only wanted like a white, open, big, very lit up space. And that was our first work. We worked with poured concrete, exposed poured concrete. This is white exposed poured concrete. But again, still looking through challenging geometries, uncharted geometries with very rough methods, drawing them by hand and not working with strange algorithms. So it was kind of difficult. It was difficult to build them also. It was an incredible long process on how to try to pass these to get built in Mexico with little technology. But still was a challenge, was a nice thing. In this stream of work, we also designed this house, which is almost completed. It was designed then, that works also with the geometry of the site and of the hill. Very complex geometry coming out from the hill and the trees. I'm not going to stop about it, but it was developed around that area, that time, sorry. And I think everything changed with this house. This house was a very important project in our process. It was a house that we did with Gabriel Orozco. Gabriel Orozco is one of the most important contemporary artists we have in Mexico, or to say probably the most important one. The story, I'll go very quick. It was very funny how we met him. When I was starting my practice lots of years ago with other friends, we had no work, and one day we decided we wanted to design